welcome to this episode of Spotlight on Policy. My name is Stephanie Witt, and I'm the director of the Public Policy Center here at Boise State University. Today I'm joined by Gwen Smith, an expert in conflict resolution and public participation methods, and we're going to talk today about what makes public participation effective for local agencies and units of government. Gwen, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
You've been doing training on public hearings for so long now. Could you tell me what is the most frequent thing that people ask you about when they come to a training?
Well, they probably express their greatest fear, and that's, what do I do or how do I manage a mob? And I get that question a lot, and what I think when I hear that is that it's more of a fear than a reality. So I ask some questions about, has it ever happened? And for most practitioners, to tell you the truth, it hasn't. But they feel like they've come close. So the question is, how can we avoid having a mob situation at one of our public meetings? The key is the planning ahead of time. And you might ask yourself some questions. And one of them would be, what is this meeting about? What would be the preferred outcome? And that's from the agency that's planning the meeting's perspective and also from the stakeholders' perspective. And from the stakeholders' perspective, do they know what's expected of them when they get there? Are they going to make a decision? Are they going to be educated? Are they going to just voice approval and somebody else is going to make a decision? That needs to be really clear right up front. So given that kind of information, then you need to know, well, who cares about this meeting anyway? And if the right people aren't there, will it matter? And have I identified who they are? And shall I make sure they're there? I told you a little story once about two counties were part of a public meeting, and it seemed like all the stakeholders in one county had been left off the mailing list. And when they got wind of the meeting and showed up, that was the closest thing to a mob I've ever seen. And it took some handling. That is just north of them, and they couldn't figure out why they weren't part of that decision-making process. So when they got the flyer that says, we're going to hold a public meeting and tell you about the road we're planning through your property, you can imagine they were upset. So that's part of identifying the stakeholders ahead of time and make sure that you know. It's kind of like lobbying the legislature, don't you think? If you can't count the votes before you go in, you best not have the committee meeting.
So depending on what kind of a meeting we're going to have, what my expectation is about what's going to happen and who's going to be there, I might set the room up differently. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Boy, I sure can. If the idea is to educate the public, they aren't best educated by a talking head. We have so many good visual things that we can use, big display boards that lay out pictures of the project, how it might look and how it looks now. We can have experts on hand at these little stations to talk about maybe it's right-of-way that people are interested in, or maybe it's how it's going to look in the end. Experts there to talk about people in small groups is a preventive measure. If people can't mob up in a bunch of theater seats, they act differently. I guess that's what I should say. They act differently.
And our agencies and governments sometimes are holding a public hearing as a result of a statutory requirement or an administrative rule requirement, but you feel like these attentions to how the participation is crafted and who's invited can still be done even though the hearing has to be had according to law.
Oh, exactly. Exactly. And I think the steps that precede the hearing are just as important whether or not there's going to be a hearing at the end or there's not. And the first one is, if people's opinion is going to be part of what's going on, then you need to ask them and tell them how you will use their opinion and when you will come back to them and how. What you'll do with the information that they give you. And boy, it's important to do something with it. And don't wait months and months for people to move away and new people to move in and then announce another meeting, and the next group of people you get are different from the first group. So it's important. Timing's important.
Are those expectations in the material that go out to the public to ask them to attend? Or is that the kind of thing you set up with people when they arrive at the actual venue?
Actually, both ways. I think it's good when you send out an invitation to attend a meeting that you identify what the expectation is. You can expect to come. We'll have information for you. We'll have experts available to answer your questions. We want your input. You can give it to us in writing, or we'll listen to it and we'll write it down. We'll do whatever is best for you. And if that's on the invitation, the people who come are prepared to hear what's going to go on. And then the next thing is they come in the door, you give them a piece of paper with a map and says, you're going to find these things around the room. So go to the place that's of most interest to you and ask our expert.
So in order to avoid that mob, the summary advice would be?
Planning ahead. Making sure you know what it is the outcome is supposed to be for the meeting, that the right people are there to make the decisions or get the information, and that they're treated well, and then you get back to them with what you've done.
Thanks, Gwen.
You're welcome.
Thanks for joining us. You've been listening to Spotlight on Policy, a production of Boise State University's Public Policy Center. Thank you.